Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive transformation that is happening right now in the world of financial compliance. The global rules of the game are radically converging, and they're being redesigned from the ground up to trap modern financial criminals. We're going to see exactly how regulators are expanding their reach and, honestly, completely reshaping what it means to actually be compliant.
It really all starts with one massive modern challenge. How do you stop financial crime when criminals cross borders in literally seconds? Just think about this borderless threat for a minute. A criminal network doesn't just walk into one local bank anymore. They'll seamlessly exploit a company registered in one jurisdiction, use a trust administered in a second, open a payment account in a third, and then leverage a virtual asset provider operating across several markets all at once. The sheer speed and complexity of illicit finance has completely outpaced our traditional drawn-on-a-map borders.
Because of that incredibly fast, borderless threat, we're seeing the emergence of this entirely new anti-money laundering landscape. What we're witnessing is a fundamental shift. We are officially moving away from those isolated, passive compliance checklists. You know the ones. Instead, regulators are expanding what they call the regulatory perimeter. They're demanding active corporate transparency, harmonized requirements across regions, and highly accountable technology governance. Listen, a technically complete policy means absolutely nothing today if you're just ticking boxes. Authorities don't want paper. They want active intelligence.
To see how this works in practice, here's our roadmap. We'll hit the modern fin-crime threat, check out major regulatory shifts in the US and EU, look at expansions in the UK and Australia, see how AI fits in, and finally, build out a resilient control stack. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the modern fin-crime threat and expanding that perimeter. Okay, so the reality of modern money laundering is that it completely ignores the traditional boundaries between banking, professional services, and digital assets. Like we talked about, criminals are using companies in one country, trusts in another, and virtual assets everywhere. This is exactly why regulators are moving way beyond formal compliance. An institution might have a perfectly written, beautiful policy, but it's entirely useless if the underlying data is garbage, if the actual ownership of a shell company isn't verified, or if suspicious activity is only flagged weeks after the funds are gone. Regulators are demanding that institutions adapt the second criminal behavior changes. Which brings us to our second section, the US and EU regulatory shifts aimed at closing those loopholes. There is a pretty stark contrast between what was planned and what actually happened in the US with the Corporate Transparency Act. The original intention, a broad, sweeping federal reporting regime for domestic companies to finally unmask shell companies. But the revised reality by March 2025, a significantly narrowed scope. The US basically exempted all domestic entities, focusing primarily on foreign entities operating there. For banks, this is a massive headache. You can't just look up a US company in a national registry and call it a day anymore. You have to dig deeper, conduct real investigations, and cross-reference customer declarations with tax info and transaction activity. Now, looking across the Atlantic, the European Union is taking a completely different, honestly highly aggressive approach. Instead of fragmented national directives where every single member state interprets the rules differently, the EU AML package establishes a single rulebook, and it is directly applicable to member states. They're even introducing a union-wide cash payment limit of 10,000 euros. This is a huge fundamental shift towards centralized power. Let's look at how this timeline actually plays out. The legislative package was adopted in 2024. Next up, the new central authority, AMLA, begins operating in Frankfurt in 2025. Then, by 2027, they're going to select 40 significant cross-border entities, and by 2028, direct supervision officially kicks in. If you're a multinational institution, this changes your whole world. You can't rely on local interpretations or workarounds anymore. You've got to demonstrate consistent data quality and control performance across the entire single market. Let's keep this global tour moving with Section 3, UK and Australia expansions. This is all about holding corporations and gatekeepers liable. So the really crucial point here is how the UK is connecting financial crime governance directly with corporate culture. Under the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, we aren't just looking at mandatory ID verification for directors. The UK introduced a specific corporate offense of failing to prevent fraud. Think about what that means. A large organization can literally be held criminally liable if an associated person commits fraud intended to benefit the company, and they didn't have reasonable prevention procedures in place. Fraud risk isn't just confined to some back-office detection team anymore. It's a top-level corporate accountability issue. Meanwhile, check out what's happening down in Australia with their Tranche 2 reforms. They are physically widening the regulatory perimeter to capture what they call gatekeepers. We're talking legal professionals, accountants, conveyancers, real estate professionals, trust providers, and even precious metals dealers. Criminals heavily exploit these legitimate sectors to mask moving illicit funds. This absolutely proves that financial crime is no longer just a banking problem. Financial institutions now have to carefully review how much they rely on these professional intermediaries, because just depending on a generic outsourced verification tool, that's no longer legally sufficient. Shifting gears into Section 4, we move from physical borders into the digital realm. AI enters the perimeter and policing the machines. Artificial intelligence has officially become the new frontline for AML operations. Institutions are all in on using machine learning and generative systems to sniff out suspicious behavior. But with regulations like the EU AI Act of 2024, AI quickly went from a cool, experimental toy to a heavily regulated governance issue. Regulators are drawing a hard line in the sand. They're saying, if you use AI to support financial crime decisions, it absolutely must be governed, it must be explainable, and you have to have meaningful human oversight. FinCrime teams are up against some serious risks when they try to police these machines. We're talking about biased alert prioritization, poor data lineage, model drift, and actually the most alarming one is unsupported generative outputs. Imagine an AI essentially hallucinating a plausible but entirely fake explanation for a sketchy transaction. There's also the danger of excessive reliance on third-party systems. The mandate here is crystal clear. A machine's conclusions must always remain completely traceable back to source evidence. Proper governance isn't meant to block innovation, it's literally what makes your advanced analytics legally defensible. So, how can institutions possibly survive this massive convergence of physical and digital regulations? That brings us to our final section, the resilient control stack and surviving the convergence. To survive this, institutions have to build a defense fortress, layer by layer, and finally break down those silos between isolated teams. It starts at step 1 with regulatory intelligence, having a structured inventory of changing laws. You build on that with step 2, reliable data, where you're independently verifying ownership. Then comes step 3, enterprise risk assessment to constantly adapt to new tech, and step 4, control traceability, so you can prove exactly which AI model or data produced a decision. All of this is held together by step 5, cross-functional governance, which forces legal, tech, and fraud teams out of their corners. And finally, step 6, continuous testing to make sure the whole fortress actually holds up. At the end of the day, the absolute strongest compliance programs aren't just checking policy boxes. They take these complex legal rules and translate them into actual operational muscles. True success means real prevention outcomes. It means generating high-value intelligence and sharing that information rapidly across the organization to catch bad actors before the damage is done. I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. As all these global changes roll out, will institutions monitor only the written rule and remain entirely reactive? Or will they understand the broader policy direction and adapt before a regulatory change turns into a massive control failure? These aren't just arbitrary deadlines, folks. This is a mandatory global shift toward true transparency and real accountability. It's time to stop checking boxes and start building real defenses. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you know.